Hello everyone, I know how much you all love the deep web, so I made this giant compilation of some of the best deep web stories available online, many of which are exclusive to this channel only. If you realize you've heard one of these before, the timestamps are in the description down below as well as the pinned comment. But before I begin the video, I want to let you guys know of an awesome shirt over on Teespring. If you're watching this, you can probably relate to that shirt. If you enjoy these videos, it's a great way to support the channel, and I'm definitely going to be picking one up myself. But without any further ado, let's get creepy. Remember when deep web stories were the fad? Every week you'd find a new tale of someone going too far on the deep web, finding something terrible and ending up getting attacked for speaking out against it. This story's a bit similar. The difference is, I still love the deep web. Let me explain. I was a senior in high school at the time, and I was definitely no popular kid. My friends were the oddities of the school and the few people who dared to defy the norm. It was them who told me about the deep web. A place on the internet where you are completely unwatched, anonymous, capable of doing whatever you want. Of course, I was intrigued. Most of my friends just used it to buy drugs, but I thought a little bit bigger. I wanted to know what happened in the darkest parts of the deep web, whether or not my friends were telling the truth when they talked about horrible fetish sites and assassins you can hire to kill anyone you like. Of course, I wasn't planning on using any of it. I've never been particularly interested in sex, so fetish sites don't interest me, and there's really nobody I'd like to kill. It was the mystery of it all that fascinated me. Going to these sites would be like peering into a side of the world only a few have ever seen, like a wholly new experience. At the time, I was tired of the monotony of life. I'd get up at the same time every day, go to school, attend the same classes, talk to the same people, go home, play games, do homework, go to sleep, and then it would repeat. I wondered if other people got tired of that. Anyway, it took me a while to actually dive into the deep web. As fascinated as I was, I'd been warned of what could happen to me. I read the stories I talked about too. Who isn't afraid of being threatened by hackers or stalked by some creep you piss off online? That kind of shit kept me from actually going on the deep web. Until the day I manned up and decided it was time to break the monotony. It was time to delve into the underbelly of the internet. Time to see a world I had only dreamed of. For the first week or so, it was fucking boring. It was just drug sites and stuff where people exposed government secrets or whatever. Nothing as dark as I expected. I don't even do drugs, so that was useless to me, and I wasn't into politics. There wasn't really much I was into back then, so I was disappointed. The only reason I kept exploring was my sheer desire to experience the world I thought existed on the deep web. That world was darker than any drug site. That world had murder, torture, fucked up porn for fucked up people, and all sorts of nasty shit. I eventually got my wish. Just when my apathy towards the deep web got to its highest point, I found what I was looking for. The site didn't have a name. I thought it was a broken link for a bit, since it only led me back to a black screen. Right before I could click on it, however, a chat box opened on the screen. Someone using the name admin typed in the chat box saying, "Congrats, you found the worst place on the fucking net." I stared at the screen, more bemused than afraid. It took me a moment to type back, "Cool." That's all I said. What else was there to say? "I'm here to see your finest torture porn?" A moment after, the admin replied, "Ha ha, you want in?" I hesitated, all those horror stories flooding back into my head, but it was too late to chicken out. This was what I came for. Even if I just clicked out of the first sign of danger, I had to see what was there. I had to break the fucking monotony. I had to know. I hastily typed back, not allowing myself to stop. Yeah. The chat box closed, and I was led directly to what looked like a video with another chat box next to it. There were around 5 other people there, each eagerly waiting for something. The video was in black and white and showed a small room. The only thing inside was a wooden chair, until after around 5 minutes of waiting, the door to the room opened. A man was shoved inside, blindfolded and naked, save for a pair of black briefs. He was followed by a woman, this one dressed all in black, her face covered by a mask. In an instant, the chat room went wild. I almost closed the window to spare myself, knowing immediately where this was going. But again, I told myself that this is what I wanted. Maybe not the torture, but the window into the very worst parts of the world. The woman pulled a knife from her pocket and cut off the man's blindfold as she shoved him into the chair. He didn't struggle for a moment, and once his eyes were visible, I could see why. It looked like he'd been drugged. Resisting was impossible. I frowned, glancing to the side. This was fucked up. I knew this was fucked up. My conscience told me to call the cops, or at least to click out, but I forced myself to watch. She turned to the camera, pointing the knife at the man's throat. One of the people in the chat typed, "One of the fingers cut off one of his fingers." I clenched my hands into fists, taking in a sharp breath. Was this really happening? Was I just gonna watch as this guy got mutilated, as a small crowd of people watched in glee? I felt like throwing up, a feeling that only worsened when the woman nodded and turned to the man, grabbing his limp hand and carefully slicing off one of his fingers. Blood spurted from the wound, and the man moaned in pain, but he couldn't fight back. Breathing heavily, I hovered my cursor over the X, planning on getting the fuck out of there. But I didn't. The woman looked unimpressed, as if she thought the people in chat could do better. Another person called for a slice up the man's arm, and she complied. He was bleeding heavily now, clearly in deep pain, but these people were fucking sick. They were cheering her on from chat, suggesting new and painful tortures for her to inflict. Eventually, I stopped breathing heavily. I stopped, feeling sick. It was starting to grow on me. By the end, the man was on the ground, covered in blood and breathing heavily. I watched this for around a half a minute. The people in chat were starting to die down. They'd inflicted enough pain, they had their fun. It seemed like things were wrapping up. Funny, I thought how it was just over when I was getting into it. I smirked. This was exciting. This was better than any game I could play, much better than any fucking class I could attend, better than sitting with a group of fucking nobodies pretending like I cared for a goddamn second about them. This was the world I wanted to see. This was darkness. This was the underbelly. This was reality. Fucking end him. Slit the throat. I typed in the chat for the first time. She nodded for one last time, bringing the man to his feet before slowly dragging her blade across his throat, sending more of his blood spurting out. Once it was done, she dropped him and he fell to the ground, limp. He was dead. The people in the chat started complimenting the torturer, talking about how it had been another good time, starting to set a date for the next showing. On screen, the woman left the room, leaving the corpse behind. Of course, I hastily wrote down the date for the next showing. This was going to be part of my life now. I was going to be part of something bigger. I was going to command these people's deaths. What a rush. So yeah, I still love the deep web. I'm in college now, and now I'm even more immersed in the deep web. I've seen some shit people would freak out just knowing exists. I've fucked around every sick porn site known to man. I've finally broken the monotony of life. Inspirational, right? How one high schooler defies the boredom inherent in his life by discovering his true passion. I love the deep web. Have you ever gone wild with your friends? So wild that life becomes boring for weeks after? Those are the best. I lived for those times. It's the rest of the space in between that I can't stand. Every time I watch my friends leave, I'd be hit with a burst of anxiety because I knew it was back to my mundane, monotonous life of working a job I didn't like, dealing with people I didn't care about, and living a life I didn't want. I could go on and on about how terrible my life has been. I could sit for hours and tell you about the mother that walked out on me, or the father that would beat me on a whim. I could go on for days about the kids at school who rejected me for being weird, but that's not what this is about. However, I will tell you a few things. First and foremost, I was intellectually gifted, as one of my elementary school teachers told me. According to state testing, I was ranked in the top 1% of the country. But despite this, I found school to be extremely painful. I barely passed my classes from year to year because I wouldn't bother to show up. I mean, why would I? My choice was between going to a class where everyone treated me like shit, studying material a retard could understand, or hanging out with the only group of people on this earth who accepted me for who I am. I can still hear my teacher saying, "Ryan, you need to buckle down, young man." The fact that I got through school, showing up once every 2 weeks, really says a lot about the modern educational system, doesn't it? The times I did show up to class, I had to deal with Chad. Chad was the most popular kid in the school. He had a bunch of friends, good grades, and made it a personal goal to make my life a living hell. I hated Chad. I hated him more than Hitler hated Jews. I can't even tell you how many nights I'd spend praying that Chad would be diagnosed with cancer or get hit by a car and die in agonizing pain. Unfortunately, I never realized that God would never answer my prayers, any of them. I'd have had better luck killing and torturing Chad myself and praying for forgiveness, because that's just how God works. Well, anyway, as the years passed, I found myself working a shitty job, making enough to stay alive. I had nobody who cared about me. I'd have been completely alone in this world had it not been for my friends. We all lived pretty far from each other, but despite this, on the last weekend of every month, we'd all go wild. We raised a lot of hell over the years. Thankfully, we never got caught for the shit we did. I think the most fun I ever had in my life was the Sunday morning we were playing mailbox baseball. The game is pretty self-explanatory. We came up to one house where an old, grumpy man lived. He just so happened to be getting his morning paper as we drove by and smashed his mailbox to pieces. I was the one who hit it, and I used a strong metal bat. The mailbox itself was shattered, and we all roared with laughter as the old man dropped his coffee in surprise. That is my fondest memory I ever made with my friends. But once I was alone, it was me, alone, again. Nothing but my thoughts, which tortured me so. There was one thing I thought about quite often. My ex-girlfriend. Her name was Sarah. Sarah was the only girlfriend I ever had, and I honestly loved her. I loved her with all my heart. I still remember laying with her on the hood of my Toyota 96 and just looking up into the sky. I can still hear her voice too.
I love you, Ryan.
I wish I could just freeze that moment in time and never stop living it. I liked being with her more than I liked being with my friends, and trust me when I say, that's really saying something. Unfortunately, she just disappeared one day. No note, no goodbye, no nothing. 1 second she was the light of my soul, illuminating the fiber of my very existence, and the next, she was nowhere to be found. Out of my life, forever. That was 2 years ago now, and it still stings to think about it. I spent a lot of time looking for her, and I still don't know what to think. Was she gone because of something I did? I thought we had a perfect relationship, which is why it was such a surprise. Sarah was the only woman I ever had a relationship with, and I started to believe she was the only woman I would ever love. This sent me into a spiraling depression, and I drank even more than I usually did. The days leading up to seeing my friends seemed to go on forever. I didn't know what to do with myself. That woman was the only thing that truly gave me any hope for my future. I was a better version of myself when I was with her, and now she was gone. For all I knew, she was dead. She may as well have been, because I mourned her departure all the same. That Friday night, I got a call from my friend before he and the guys came over. I almost told them not to, but he persuaded me it would be dumb to sit in the house alone and cry over my ex. I agreed with him, and he said he'd be there in 5 minutes. When they arrived, we all started drinking and shooting the shit. Everyone shared their own story of getting dumped, which we've all heard dozens of times. It still made me feel a little bit better though. I actually changed my mindset. I started thinking, this could be the last day of my life. I'm gonna live it to the fullest. After having a few more beers, I talked the guys into going for a few street races. They sheepishly agreed, and we were off. By the time we were on the road for a few minutes, I knew that I was a little too tipsy to be driving. But I knew I would be ridiculed for the rest of the night if I turned around. I started talking up how I was gonna win one race and leave the undefeated king. After challenging a few random strangers at red lights, we didn't get any bites. Until we came to the perfect road for a race. Some jackass in a white truck pulled up to the light. I revved my engine and looked over at him. He looked at me and revved his engine. As I looked inward, I noticed he was a total redneck. He was wearing a flannel shirt with suspenders and had to have been at least 100 pounds overweight. Being a northern transplant in the deep south, I yelled out the insult one might expect. "I'm gonna fuck you like we did back in the war, hick boy!" My friends all found it amusing, and we were a perfect cacophony of drunken slurs and laughter. The light turned green, and I put the car into drive. That was the last thing I remember before waking up in the hospital. I couldn't feel my legs, and I felt like someone who just met the wrong group of peaceful refugees. I looked up at the nurse and asked her what the hell happened. She looked on with a frown and told me that I was involved in a major car accident. "Where are all my friends? Are they alright?" She then told me I was the only survivor. I couldn't believe it. I didn't speak the rest of the time I was there. With my friends gone, I lost every single person in my life that I cared about. Now I had no girlfriend, no friends, and no future. What was I going to do now? Despite being a broken fragment of a human being, time marched on. Father Time didn't care about the tragedy of my life. After I physically recuperated from the accident, I was informed that I would never be able to walk again. On the surface, that sounded pretty bad, but I quickly realized that I was eligible for disability compensation. I made more money than I did when I had a job, and I didn't even have to do anything. I spent the first few months drinking and smoking weed. That was literally what I did from the moment I opened my eyes until the moment I was asleep again. I thought about suicide every day, and the guilt seemed to be crushing me from the inside. I don't even have something to compare it to. Maybe Jesse on Breaking Bad after he kills Gale and loses his mind, but this was real. I was responsible for the deaths of all my friends. Not to mention, my girlfriend just left me out of nowhere one day. After life continued on like this for a long time, I started to become completely apathetic. It was almost like there just wasn't a reason to do anything. A few more months went by, and I started to recover a little from everything that happened. I still had nightmares and everything, but it wasn't the only thing I thought about anymore. During this time, I found myself becoming increasingly bored. I never realized how much I depended on my friends to keep me sane. I just didn't have any fun whatsoever when they weren't around. One day, I decided to go out and buy a laptop. It had been a long time since I used one, and getting my internet service hooked up again was a real hassle. But the internet was pretty fun when I started using it again. I almost felt normal again. I ended up spending most of my time on the deep web. One night, I came across a horror video. The title was, "I Lost My Family to the Deep Web." The story was really interesting, and I wondered if it was true or not, but it got me genuinely interested in the deep web. I spent the rest of the night listening to deep web horror stories. After about 7 hours of stories, I called it a night. When I woke up the next morning, I started to wonder if I should download Tor and explore the deep web a bit myself. It had been a long time since I did my usual thrill-seeking, and I really needed a pick-me-up. Within 10 minutes, I had Tor downloaded and installed on my computer. My heart was pounding when I opened it. Was I going to be stalked and killed? Was I going to see some of the crazy things I heard about in those horror stories? I had no idea at the time, but I wanted nothing more than to find out. I started out exploring the hidden wiki. I must have clicked on 100 dead links before I even found a page that wasn't broken. That didn't bug me though. It wasn't like I had anything better to do. The first page I came across included instructions of some kind. After studying them thoroughly, I came to the realization that it was an instruction manual on how to make a bomb. They even had a section on how to set the timer and the kinds of places to put it in public for the most destruction. I was a little creeped out, but this bomb manual thing wasn't nearly shocking enough for my tastes. I needed something more. I did a little more browsing when I came across something that was truly crazy. It was a video, and in the video was a man with a black bag over his head. I started to get a bit nervous when the video started playing by itself. I thought to myself that I should stop it because I might see something that can't be unseen. But part of me wanted to see it anyway. I was looking for cheap thrills after all, right? There was some really ominous music in the background, and I began to feel extremely uncomfortable. The suspense was killing me, although I knew what was going to happen to the man from the very beginning. I almost clicked away after an entire minute passed, and the man continued to just sit there. I started to move my cursor toward the back button when I saw another man walk over to the man with the black bag over his face. The other man removed the bag and walked away. He then said something in another language. That was when I heard a loud noise. It sounded like a large metal trapdoor or something like that. All of a sudden, hundreds of scorpions fell from the ceiling onto this poor man. It was the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. I'll never forget the way he screamed for those last few seconds. He was dead before he could take another breath. I sat in my chair, hardly believing what I'd just witnessed. As sick as it might be to admit this, I actually felt pretty exhilarated by this. My forehead was covered in cold sweat, and for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. And that was when my new hobby started to envelop my life. Aside from occasionally smoking a bowl, I'd spend all my time on the deep web, searching for the most disturbing things I could find. I don't know why I did, but it was so exciting. Even more exciting than all those crazy stunts I did with my friends. There was just something fascinating about the dark extremes of the human experience that gave me some weird high. I can't explain it, and I don't understand it. And I'm pretty sure that I don't want to. I could go on and on about the various things I'd seen on the deep web. I could talk about the disturbing child pornography, mutilation of animal carcasses, and torture that would make medieval Europeans cringe. But I'll skip over that for time's sake. I'm not entirely sure how long it had been. Perhaps a few months, maybe a year or two. I don't really know. I didn't keep track of the time. I didn't have a reason to. No job, no friends, nothing outside of my twisted little internet hobby. But it was around this time that I began to grow increasingly bored of the deep web. It seems once you spend enough time on there, it begins to feel like you've seen it all. After all, if I hadn't seen it all, I'd at least have seen most of it. But every time I thought about doing something other than browsing the deep web, I was reminded of the time I spent being alone and doing absolutely nothing. I didn't want to go back to that. I had no desire. Looking at torture porn on the deep web was better than that by a long shot. Well, one night I was browsing the dark web as usual, and something strange happened. A black chat box appeared on my screen. I didn't really know what to make of it. It just seemed out of this world. I was instantly brought back to all those horror stories about the deep web. Was this going to be the end of my deep web experience, or even my life? Ominous red text came to appear in the box. Can you talk? I got a chill down my spine and instantly felt spooked. I don't know if it was because this was so unexpected, or because I'd heard so many deep web horror stories that began just like this. Sure, I typed back. I bet you're really missing Sarah right now, aren't you? The stranger replied. I was taken aback. How the hell did he know about Sarah? I never even mentioned her anywhere on the internet. I felt my heart start to pound, but again like it used to when I first started using the deep web. But this time, it wasn't for excitement. It was from fear. I thought about shutting my laptop down, but I realized that this guy must have been stalking me for some time, if he knew about Sarah. I figured I may as well hear what he has to say at the very least. I started typing, yes, I do. How do you know about her? Who are you? He replied with only 2 words, but they left me seriously questioning my own sanity. The devil. I had no idea what to think. This guy not only knew about Sarah, but he claimed he was the devil. I sat there completely in shock for some time. That was a more likely explanation than some deep web hacker that just so happened to be stalking me for half my life. I know, it sounds dumb, but I actually believed him. Then he got me on a voice call, and I knew that my suspicions were confirmed. Hello?
How are you this evening?
I'm fine.
I understand how strange it must be for me to be contacting you like this, but there is something that I simply must inform you of.
And what's that?
You remember when Sarah left you, right?
Yes.
What if I told you that she left you for your worst enemy, Chad?
Bullshit. There's no way she would do that.
You do remember how materialistic she was, right? Is it really a stretch to think that she'd leave you, someone who could barely provide for himself, for someone who could buy her all the things her heart desired?
I don't believe
you. You don't have to take my word for it. Just look at Chad's Facebook profile. As you can see, they clearly have quite the loving relationship and don't mind sharing it with the world.
I couldn't fucking believe it. There she was, with Chad. There must have been hundreds of pictures of them. Pictures of them at the beach, shopping, and even kissing.
I think you'll really appreciate this status Sarah made just after she left you for Chad.
A month ago, I was stuck in a dead-end relationship with a loser who was never going to get his act together. Now, I'm with a real man who knows how to treat a lady. This is the best decision I have ever made. I love you, Chad.
Why are you telling me this?
Because you can get away with the murder Don't lie to me. I know it's already crossed your mind.
No, I can't. I'll spend the rest of my life in prison.
No, you won't. Look at who you're talking to. I can guarantee you get away with the murder. All you have to do is show up and shoot them.
I can't. Okay. I have a question.
Yes.
Is she happy?
She's much happier than she ever was with you.
If she's happier with him, then I can live with that. I can let her go. Then we're done here. We're done.
I will warn you now. This is a one-time offer. I can assure that you get away with the murder scot-free, but if you turn down my offer, there is no turning back. You will have to live in a world where the bastard who tormented you for 8 years stole the love of your life, and you did nothing about it. If you can live with that, then so can I.
What is your plan?
Very simple, actually. Like I said before, all you have to do is show up and put a bullet through both of their skulls.
Wait, I'm fine with killing Chad, but how can I kill Sarah too? I still love her.
She betrayed you. How can you be that much of a coward and let her get away with it?
I'll do it.
What was that?
Okay, I'll do it.
Alright, good. You made the right choice. You'll go over their house tonight, roll up to the front door in your wheelchair, knock, and when they answer, let 'em have it. You'll find a pistol in the cabinet where you keep your weed.
And you're sure I'll get away with it?
Only if you do what I tell you to do. If you deviate from the plan even a little, then you're on your own.
Okay. I'm in. And with that, the devil was gone just as fast as he had appeared. I didn't feel good about this whole thing, but what other choice did I have? The reason I got my friends killed was because of her. It was her fault that all my friends were dead. That bitch was gonna pay. I knew she never believed in me, and that Chad. Oh, how I was gonna love killing that curly-haired motherfucker. My heart was pumping as I made my way over there. I couldn't imagine something on this earth I wanted more than to see them dead. I licked my lips in anticipation to watch them die. When I got there, I instantly began to regret my decision. But I kept going anyway. I slowly wheeled myself up to their front door and rang the doorbell. My heart was pounding like a drum in my chest. Could I really go through with this? I almost turned around to leave, but then they opened the door together. They both looked really surprised to see me after all these years. I slowly raised the gun and pointed it toward Chad. My arm kept shaking, and I did my best to pull the trigger, but it just wouldn't shoot. That was when I realized I couldn't do it, so I dropped the gun and looked at the floor. "I'm sorry," I said.
Ryan, what the fuck are you doing here?
All of a sudden, the devil appeared out of nowhere. He gave me a disappointed look and picked up the gun. He then shot both Chad and Sarah in the head. I screamed at him, but it was no use. He vanished into thin air just as soon as he had appeared. I couldn't believe my eyes. Was I hallucinating? It all happened so fast, it didn't even seem like real life. I just sat there in my wheelchair for a minute, having just witnessed a double homicide. That was when I heard police sirens from behind me. 2 officers got out of the car and started screaming at me to freeze. I knew that I was going to spend the rest of my life in prison now, for sure. So, allow this to be a warning to those of you who use the deep web, as I did. If you ever encounter the devil for yourself, whatever you do, don't take him up on his offer. My name was Mark Stravinsky. As you can tell by the title of this post, I'm a killer, a criminal, And you probably think I'm a monster. I wouldn't argue with you. I've done terrible things to good people. I've helped evil people with their agendas, and I've ruined thousands of lives by doing so. Today, I'm coming clean. I'm admitting to the big crimes, murders, and conspiracies I've been involved in. I can't cover everything, as the entire list is quite extensive, and honestly, I probably don't remember all of it anymore. I've been doing this for quite a long time. Long enough to know that the bad guys get away with pure, unadulterated evil. I feel the need to issue a warning before I get into the details. What I'm about to tell you will not make you a happier person or make your life any better. You'll probably be labeled a conspiracy theorist nutjob if you ever talk about these things outside in the real world, but they need to be known. I don't give a fuck whether you believe me or not. These are things that I did, things that I saw. It's easy for you to just hear my story and outright deny it, but I can't just do that. I can't just click my fingers and make the last 20 years of my life disappear. With all that said, let's begin with who I was before I became an evil henchman. I had a fairly decent upbringing, but I was a failure in high school. I was one of those kids who were just passed along, putting in just enough work not to fail. My parents coddled me, and I became weak, lazy, and spoiled as a result. At 18 years old, I had no work ethic, no motivation, and no direction. Most of my time was spent hanging out with my friends, smoking weed, or watching TV. When I graduated, my parents wanted me to start thinking about my future seriously and threatened to kick me out if I didn't change. I didn't, though, and the free ride only lasted a few months, most of it being spent fighting with my asshole parents. When they kicked me out, I realized how nice I had it there and regretted everything I'd done within just a few days. Sleeping on concrete can have a really sobering effect. My parents tried to contact me a few times after they learned that I was homeless, but I was done with them. They were dead to me. After applying to dozens of jobs throughout the city, I realized that nobody wanted to hire a hobo, so I did what any smart homeless person does. I enlisted in the military. I became an infantryman, and it looked like I had finally found a place I belonged. When I went to basic, I was a weak, lazy piece of shit, but by the end, I was a highly motivated badass. I honestly have no clue what changed me, but I graduated at the top of my class. I was like this entirely different person in just a few weeks. Shortly after that, I became an asset for the US military on the battlefield. I had the most confirmed kills in my company, and I quickly climbed the ranks. I was really surprised to learn I had a natural act for warfare. I remember one of the officers saying to me, "Son, a soldier like you comes along once in 100 years." I was ecstatic. Time practically flew by, and before I knew it, my time was up. I remember being in shock that 4 years had already passed. I planned on re-enlisting because there was nothing else out there for me in the world. It was just a few nights before I could fill out the forms to re-enlist when I was approached by some rather peculiar men. I could tell that they were powerful men by the way that the officers respected and almost seemed to fear them. They said they had a prestigious position available for me, and that because of my life circumstances, I was perfect for the job. Without a family and nobody outside of the military knowing I exist, nobody was better suited. The fact that I was good with a rifle didn't hurt either. I was also informed that if I accepted their offer, there would be no record of me having ever existed. Everything from my birth certificate and my military service would disappear. The thought of my military service being erased from the world made me cringe a little, but with everything taken into consideration, this was going to be one hell of a job offer, or so I thought. I later learned that these men were billionaires, high-ranking government and military officials, and some were even world diplomats. Before you get your tinfoil hats out, I feel the need to say this, that This wasn't the Illuminati, some Jewish conspiracy, the lizard people, or anything like that. This was one of the networks of powerful sociopaths, yes, but there are hundreds of those networks. Most conspiracy theorists make the mistake of thinking there is one collective behind it all. There isn't. There are networks of powerful, evil people who partake in conspiracies for a number of reasons. Most of them are only out to make more money or to expand their business interests in general. There are a few idealistic networks that are attached to an idea, the most powerful, to my knowledge, being the globalists. The people who want to bring about the New World Order and become the governing force of the earth, thinking they and their descendants will be some benevolent line of elite leaders humankind would be lucky to have. Those are easily the most fucked up people I've ever worked for. I guess it just goes to show, just because you're an elite, corrupt billionaire doesn't mean you can't be crazy too. But more on them later. Something I feel I need to explain is the fact that this can all be pretty confusing. None of these networks have names. People are sometimes connected to multiple networks, and many of the networks have connections to other networks. But this first one that recruited me was one of the most powerful I've ever worked for. I mean, they bossed around the military. That should tell you all you need to know. Obviously, I accepted their offer. This first network was interested in world politics and corruption. They did their best to bribe and control politicians around the world, and they did a damn good job of it too. My mission was to assassinate a politician in New Zealand. They didn't tell me about the kind of operation they were running, in fact, most of them don't. The guy's name was Bruce Beetham. After funding Beetham's primary opposition and getting him voted out of office, he started to do some investigation into election fraud, amongst other things. I was also instructed to destroy any evidence of any wrongdoing against my clients. They gave me 10 grand up front to cover any expenses I had in order to complete the mission. I was promised 100 grand after the mission was completed. I was in New Zealand within a few days. I didn't want to bring a gun, considering their gun laws over there are fucking crazy, even back then. Instead, I brought a small dosage of ricin with me, and I knew that that was all I was going to need. I began tracking him, studying his patterns, and things of that sort. I noticed that he must have been pretty comfortable because his security and safety precautions were pretty bare minimum. The guy didn't even have a house alarm. He just had a sign in the window that said he did. After 3 days of tracking him and noticing he seldom left his house, I set my plan in motion. It was the middle of the night, and he lived alone with his wife. With some state-of-the-art break-and-enter technology I now had access to, I broke into his house. I crept in as silent as can be. I made my way to their bedroom and began pushing the door open. It was an old house, and the door made the worst squeaking sound you've ever heard. I pushed it so slowly that at times I wondered if it was moving at all. But I knew that I had to remain patient. Then, in the pitch black room, I heard motion. It was him. He sat up. "Is anyone there?" he asked. I was mortified, terrified that my plans were foiled. It took everything in me to maintain my composure and sit there, silently, waiting, listening, watching. He must have sat up for 15 minutes, and it was excruciating. I knew I couldn't move, or he'd hear me. I was trapped there. Each second felt like an hour, but I sat still. When he finally laid back down to go to bed, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. From there, it was easy to walk over and place the small dosage of ricin into his mouth. Shortly after, I made my way to his office and destroyed every piece of paper in there. Mission accomplished. I spent the rest of my time there kayaking. 2 days later, it was announced that he died of a heart attack. It's funny, in a way. My clients, they controlled all the media over there, so no one even reported on his death despite being a prominent politician. To this day, the way he died isn't available to the public. A lot of what I know about this case was learned later. Back then, I made the false assumption that because this network was working with the American military, it was good and moral. Looking back, I can't believe how naive I was. Days later, I was on one of their private yachts discussing how they planned on paying me. The man I assumed was the leader went onto the lower deck to get the cash when I suddenly saw another man come out. He looked to be some kind of military personnel by his build. "Who are you?" I asked. He responded by pulling a gun out of his jacket and firing at me. Luckily, I was quick enough to dodge the bullet by landing on the floor. He continued firing at me with his semi-automatic, but I pulled out my gun and shot him in the head. I knew that I was in danger and jumped off the yacht and swam to shore. Thankfully, I was covered by the darkness of the night. I later pieced together why they kill the men they hire. They can't afford to let their secrets get out. They can't afford to suppress information like this. The more I thought about the people involved in these conspiracies, the more it made sense. I remember how Lee Harvey Oswald was dead not too long after killing JFK. And the man who killed Oswald, Jack Ruby, was dead not too long after that. Not to mention you get government reports proposing magic bullet theory. Everyone just turned a blind eye to the fact that there was more than just one shooter that day. It's weird. There's enough evidence to say something fishy was going on, but not enough to say by who. The people chalk it up to be some grand coincidence. I've been in this line of work long enough to know that there are no fucking coincidences, especially not in politics. But before I get too off topic, let me continue my story. After I got back home, which was a shitty motel room now, I wondered what the hell I was going to do next. I can't go back into the military because those fuckers would find me there. I can't even apply for a job because, on the books, I don't exist. They erased everything about me, and it was smart of them to do it that way. When they killed me, nobody would have known except them. Luckily, I survived. There were a few months there when I was completely lost. I had no hope, no idea what to do next, and I was running out of money. Luckily, in the motel, I overheard a conversation that was life-changing to me. I overheard a few men talking about something called the Onion Router. As you all know, this was the early development of Tor, which granted access to the deep web. I was one of the first people on there, and I guess you could even say I was one of the first hitmen on the deep web. I didn't plan on becoming a hitman, it just sort of happened. I paid the motel enough to cover me for the next few months, and took what was left of the money and purchased a laptop. On this laptop, I familiarized myself with the deep web, the kind of business that was conducted there, and the kind of people who lurked about, looking for people like me. I'm sure these evil networks existed for hundreds of years and have been finding hitmen by other means for a long time, but I'm sure the deep web really sped up the process. Also, remember that this was the original deep web, before it became a watered-down pop culture genre. This was when actual criminals went on the deep web. When the deep web was for criminals, by criminals. The deep web became pure cancer after 2013, and still remains that way to this day. Well, anyway, in December, I was on the deep web looking for any kind of a job. Morality meant nothing to me. I just needed to do something to make enough money to feed myself. I still remembered being homeless and sleeping on the streets. I would have done everything in my power to prevent that from happening again. I came across someone who was offering $150K to assassinate some singer. I responded to the offer and heard back from them immediately. They told me they had to vet me before they gave me the rest of the details. The person who hired me was rich. The house they brought me to was enormous. I almost couldn't believe my eyes. After they vetted me, I demanded they pay me in advance. I learned my lesson from last time. They agreed to do so, and filled me in on the rest of the details. I was instructed to assassinate Sonny Bono. Prior to this assignment, I had no idea who the hell he was, but after doing some research, I discovered that I'd gotten myself into something serious. I didn't want to turn down the job, mostly because I didn't want to make someone that rich hate me. I agreed to the job and set out to get my target. After doing some digging, I discovered that he was vacationing in State Line, Nevada for a few days. I located him and rented a hotel room not too far from his. I watched him for a few days, waiting for my chance. I wasn't sure how I was going to do it. On the way there, I had purchased a gun, but this was a populated area, and going to prison was not going to be in my future. One day, as I was thinking about how I was going to kill him, I saw that he was going skiing, alone. That couldn't have happened at a better time for me. I gave him a couple minutes to go before me and followed after. I hadn't been skiing in a long time, and I was nervous about having to kill him in that situation. I knew he was an experienced skier, but I took my chances. I knew it was the best way for me to do it. After he'd begun down the hill, I went quickly thereafter. After catching up to him, I thought about pulling out my pistol to shoot him, but the trees we were gliding right past seemed to be enough to take care of the job. I inched my way closer and closer, and then I pushed him with all my might and almost lost balance myself. My client had already informed me that he had contacts in the FBI and the media, so nothing suspicious would ever be reported. After that, I started to really enjoy the corrupt work I was doing. There was some strange satisfaction I took in helping these people. Well, after that one, I found a rather interesting offer when I was back searching on the deep web. Someone was offering hundreds of thousands of dollars in annual pay to kidnap young women alive. In retrospect, it should have been obvious what these girls were going to be used for, but at the time I just didn't think about it. When someone is offering to pay you $600,000 a year, the gray area seems to expand. But I did as I was told, kidnapping and later disposing of hundreds of young girls, mostly between the ages of 12 and 14. Those were the desirable ones. After kidnapping them, I deliver them to a boat and then to an island off the coast of Italy. I have spent quite a bit of time there, enough to know that there are quite a few elites from across the globe who frequented this place. From popular politicians to actors to bankers, they couldn't get enough of this place. Thankfully, when word of the island reached the public, I was able to distance myself from the entire thing and avoid any jail time. My client, being the wealthy bastard he is, bought his way out of any serious jail time too. After I heard the news, I kinda chuckled to myself. It really goes to show that we do live in an oligarchy. I continued to work for him on and off for many years. It's been a few months, but I'm sure he'll contact me again soon enough. You see, I've participated in hundreds of these kinds of things. I'm involved in the deaths of Bernie Grant, Ivor Hansen, Pierre Charles, Marcia Stanescu, Jesse Helms, and many, many more. Look it up, see for yourself how many of these people died, and tell me it isn't suspicious. I have a feeling that my clients will continue to do these things until the end of time, and they'll never be stopped. In July of 2016, I was hired by a powerful political organization that I frequently worked for. Over the years, I'd gained their trust and assisted in many assassinations, amongst other things. I was hired to make a leaker disappear. Despite my client's connections with local and federal law enforcement, the murder has become something of a popular conspiracy theory. One that people are very interested in figuring out once and for all. This is the first time there's ever been such widespread interest, at least with this client. This has caused me to lay low. I'm currently in South America, waiting for the fire to put itself out. Soon enough, people are gonna forget about the whole thing. they're gonna forget it ever happened. Just like they always do. But this isn't necessarily my reason for making this. I'm putting this out there because it's time my clients paid for what they've done. I'm already a millionaire after having worked for them for so long. I've made my money, but now I'm done. I want you, the people, to know the fucking truth. I want you to know what they've done. And another thing. Who the fuck are you? I lost my family to the deep web. Allow me to just preface this by saying that I never used the deep web for anything too bad. I never bought drugs, I never stole movies or music. Hell, I rarely even looked at porn. I had the most generous wife you could ever imagine. I honestly didn't need porn with a woman like that in my life. I had always been fascinated by computers, but the town I grew up in was a small hick town, if that. I remember hearing about computers and the internet, and the idea of it honestly blew me away. Being able to access information from anywhere in the world was amazing, and it astounded me that it wasn't embraced and pursued by more people. So, I not only lived in a technology desert, but my family wasn't exactly rich either. My mom slaved away at a large corporation where she was paid much less than she was worth. My dad worked various odd jobs but always invested most of his time into the local church. He was a stereotypical Bible thumper, and as one might expect, I grew to resent the religion. I always felt like religion was a one-way street. They expected me to pray to and serve some imaginary deity in the sky, and all those who don't would burn in hell. My interest in history led me to the realization that every religion was similar in that regard, and that, for me, was enough to dismiss them all. Thankfully, they raised my sister and I to work hard. We both went to college and got decent jobs. She became a nurse and moved to New York. I followed my passion for history and eventually became a world history teacher at a well-paying high school in a suburb of Tennessee, not too far from where I grew up. I married my high school sweetheart shortly after getting my teaching job, and things could not have been better. We found a nice house that was close enough to both of our jobs. My wife and I had been saving up money because we were trying to have a child, although it was taking longer than we thought. After about a year of trying, we saw a doctor. He said that we were both able, but it would take some more time. This was almost nice in a way, because we did have more money than we needed for when the baby came. I decided to take a few $100s and get that computer I'd been dreaming about for years. I was so excited when my wife agreed that I should. We couldn't raise a kid in this day and age without a computer, after all, right? Well, I put it in our home office, and I quickly became enamored with my computer. I can honestly say that my life would have been so much better if I'd had one of these growing up. I could literally learn anything in the world I wanted. I found myself reading dozens of articles, speeches, books, and watching tutorials. I could not have been happier. Time marched on, and I found myself finishing up the semester and getting ready for the summer. It was pretty boring, honestly. I still got paid for it, but because the school was such a crappy district, there weren't many things for teachers to get involved in over the summer. That was when my genuine interest in the internet became something of an addiction. I was on that thing at nearly all hours of the day. Since my wife and I were still trying to have a baby, we were having sex like two animals. Life could not have gotten any better. Unfortunately, when things get that good, they can only get worse. It was a month and a half through the summer vacation when I found myself reading the same shit on the internet. There was nothing new, or at the very least, nothing worth learning about. However, I did recall hearing about something strange. It was called the deep web. I never studied it in depth, but I eventually had a basic understanding of it. I downloaded Tor and started looking around online. I made sure to be extra careful because I have heard stories of people being stalked, kidnapped, or even killed from using the deep web. I found myself staring at dozens of random links on the hidden wiki at 3 o'clock in the morning. I kept clicking away until anything useful came up. I did end up finding a lot of mathematics and science stuff, but I'm a history teacher. I'd rather learn about history. A few more hours of searching and I found something that at least remotely piqued my interest. It was a conspiracy theory page. Now, I don't consider myself to be anything of a conspiracy theorist, nor am I the least bit paranoid about things like the Illuminati. But these were some of the most solid arguments for foul play from the government I had ever seen. There were classified documents, in-depth research, and an overwhelming amount of evidence for almost every theory I saw. Don't get me wrong, there were a few that seemed a bit far-fetched, but the vast majority of them made some damn good arguments. Eventually, I couldn't hold my eyes open any longer, and I had to go to bed. I powered down my computer, and as quiet as a mouse, crawled into bed with my tender, loving wife. I felt a bit of a void between us though. She never had the lust for knowledge like I did, and if I were to tell her about the crazy and interesting things I read online, she'd playfully tease me that she was falling asleep or something to that effect. The next day, I was right back on the deep web looking for new things to widen my world's view. Nearly an hour had gone by, and all I found was a bunch of broken links. I was about to sign off when a box appeared in the corner of my screen with a link in it. Being as naive as I was, I clicked on it. I was absolutely mortified at what I saw next. At first glance, I thought the abomination on my computer screen was some kind of a torture video. No, I was dead wrong. A toddler whimpered as he sat there gagged and bound, covered in blood and piss. He begged the man in frame to stop, but to no avail. A deranged man in a Guy Fawkes mask stared at the camera as he thrusted his body to and fro. A few seconds went by when the man finished, and he got up to do a strange dance. If there was a cross between a football player's victory dance and a circus clown's opening act, the resulting atrocity might resemble the strange act the man performed over the child. To my horror, I realized it was a live feed hooked up to a webcam with a live chat box on the inside. It took a few minutes for the shocking realization to fully wash over me. After I'd collected myself, I foolishly started to read what was in the live chat box. The most horrid and disgusting things you can imagine were being requested. I had a hard time believing that real people were behind a keyboard somewhere in the world typing these things. I really don't want to go into too much more detail about what they were saying. It suddenly dawned on me that I could just close this shit and be over with it. I jolted the mouse and clicked to X out of the page, but nothing happened. I felt my stomach drop. What the hell was going on? I kept asking myself. I'd never heard about anything like this happening. I was about to manually reboot my computer when the man on the video stream called out my full name.
Leaving so soon, John Edwards. Off to teach another lesson at that little shithole you call a high school.
He asked in a smug tone. I had no idea what to do. I clicked every button on the computer, keyboard, and mouse. No matter what I did, there was no reaction. I heard him start reading off my credit card information, and I'd had enough. I unplugged my computer from the back and powered it down. It was a relief to have finally left that nightmare of a web page. I was in awe at the speed he was able to get my personal information. I changed my credit card number and any other information I could. My wife was a bit suspicious, but she didn't pry too much at it. We had a very trusting relationship, and I didn't want to frighten her, so I kept the incident to myself. A few days went by, and I didn't even go into my office. I left my computer in there, unplugged, admittedly scared to turn that damn thing on ever again. I knew I'd eventually have to face my fear, so I entered my office. I booted her up, and everything seemed to be normal. I deleted Tor and made sure to be done with that deep web shit. I casually loaded up Google Chrome, and everything seemed to be perfectly fine. Nothing seemed to come to fruition from my little mishap, and decided I was going to be safe after all. Oh, how wrong I was. About 5 months later, My wife's sister ended up moving in. She really was such a pleasant woman, and we did have extra space, so we decided to allow her to stay with us. It was just a few weeks later that my wife and I got the good news. She was pregnant. She was already a couple weeks in, and she and the baby were both healthy and in good shape. It was the best feeling in the world getting that news. I had gotten back into the swing of things with my job and occasionally reading some decent articles on the internet. We were expecting our precious baby girl in just a few days. I had completely forgotten about the events that had transpired the night I decided to use the deep web. It was a typical Sunday afternoon. I sat on my back porch drinking some cold sweet tea and listened to the hum of nature. Natural life can be so beautiful. Alone I sat in a serene peace, seemingly impenetrable from the vile world that lay outside the boundaries of my own little haven. That was when I heard a crash and screaming coming from my house. Immediately, I thought it was my sister-in-law watching TV too loud, which she had a tendency to do. But then I heard my wife sobbing uncontrollably. Panic sunk into my heart and I dashed into the house. I entered the large living room just in time to see a large masked man slit my wife's throat. I screamed at him, but he didn't even acknowledge my existence. I was screaming uncontrollably and ran toward him with intent to kill. I smashed a glass lamp over his head, but he didn't even flinch. I was questioning if he had even felt it or not. He turned around and grabbed me by my throat. He lifted me up off the ground and brought my face close to his.
"You thought I forgot about you, boy."
I instantly recognized him as the man from the deep web livestream I saw all those months ago. That was the last thing I remember before waking up. I awoke to saw my sister-in-law's mangled corpse on the floor. It looked like she'd been cut in fucking half. To my horror, I saw my beloved wife's body there, drenched in blood. I sobbed uncontrollably for some time. I'm still not sure how much time had passed while I knelt there and sobbed. Time may very well have stood still for all I knew, or cared. But after I composed myself, I noticed something strange about my wife's corpse. Her stomach was not nearly as large as I had remembered it to be. I crawled over to her to analyze her body further. The wicked idea danced across my imagination. I pushed her on her side, and my hunch turned out to be true. That sick fucking bastard had cut my child out of my wife, and had taken it. It was certainly far long enough to have been born at this point. What the fuck was I going to do? I called the police, and the operator's apparent apathy toward the situation did nothing but anger me.
911, what's the emergency?
Someone killed my family, and I think they took my daughter. I frantically let out in a single breath. I continued to tell them my address.
We'll have someone over there as soon as we can.
The way she said that frustrated me. Here I am, sitting in a puddle of my family's blood. My life's been drastically changed forever, and she makes it seem as if it's just another day at the office. Where's the empathy? Where is the compassion for your fellow human being? After days of investigation and questioning, they were unable to find the killer or my daughter. I told those lazy fucking cops that this man found me and my family because I used the deep web, but because it was so long ago, I couldn't find the website again. They couldn't do anything about it. They called it a random act of heinous violence, and within 2 weeks, this story did make the local news, but nothing more happened than that. I guess it wasn't shocking enough. The whole incident was forgotten, and people were worrying about the next horrible thing. How could I live with myself after this? My entire family was dead because I was snooping around something I had no business to be partaking in. The following weeks were the worst of my life. I would drink as soon as I got up, and then drink all day. Alcohol was the only escape from this fucked up reality I had to live with. I was the shell of a human being, nothing more than a clusterfuck of negative, hideous emotions. Misery became my only company, but I had no one to be miserable with. I had to live this horrible fate alone. Years had gone by when I looked into the mirror to see the unshaven face I had come to despise. Every day I thought about where my daughter might be. Maybe they sent her away to live with a nice, loving family across the country. I half-heartedly deluded myself. Deep down, I knew she was most likely raised in some human trafficking ring where she'd been beaten, raped, or even worse, in some hellhole filled with those sick fucks. I slowly made my way to my porch when I saw a familiar vehicle pull into my driveway. I could barely remember who it belonged to. When I saw his face, I instantly recognized him. It was my father. I hadn't seen him in years. "Son, I know you're hurting, but this is no way to live your life. Do you think you can move on?" I looked up at him, grimacing. "Do you think I'd be here doing this if I could move on?" He gave me a rough look and said that I needed to get revenge. He placed a revolver on the table in front of me, gave me a stern nod, and left. I was honestly shocked. This was the most religious man I'd known in my life who argued against killing of any kind. I didn't know if I could do it, but I started to think of how many people those bastards had done this to. I can't be the only one. So, if I were to theoretically go through with this, I'd really be doing the world a service. No, fuck that. I'm avenging my family, and I'm going to save my daughter. Over the next couple of days, I drained my bank account and purchased thousands of dollars in weaponry and ammunition. I quickly realized that there was a lot of illegal stuff that would come in real handy. I turned back to the deep web to buy spying equipment, heavy weapons, and explosives. It took about a month to gather enough supplies for my suicide mission, and as I sat in my basement with thousands of rounds of ammunition, pounds of explosives, and almost $20,000 in spying equipment, I knew I was going to wreak havoc on those sons of bitches once and for all. Days went by and I began to feel lethargic about the whole situation. I hadn't any idea of how I was going to find these people, or even if I could. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. 2 weeks went by of endless hours on the deep web, looking for the bastard who'd taken my family away from me. I came across something that seemed almost familiar in a way. It was another live stream of people torturing children. I felt a vile hatred rise up from the pit of my stomach. I knew this wasn't my guy, but I'd grown too impatient to wait any longer. If I can't find the needle in the haystack, I guess I'm just going to have to burn down the entire thing. I thought to myself with a hatred oozing from my pores. I made use of some spying equipment I bought and was able to figure out where these bastards were broadcasting from. An evil grin stretched across my face when I figured out they were right here in my own state. I loaded my car with a machine gun, an AK-47, and C4. I started my drive. This may have been the longest 2 hours in my life. I was so excited to finally kill some of these sick, disgusting people. After almost taking a wrong turn, I found the rusty old barn house the torture porn was being broadcasted from. There was surprisingly only a few people there. A total of 4 men were running this operation. I watched for a while, but they never came out of the barn house. With my AK-47 in hand, I made my way to the entrance. I could see them raping a small boy, no older than 12. He was crying hysterically and covered in blood. They were completely oblivious to me. I aimed my rifle's sight down. Admittedly, it took me a minute to actually pull the trigger. Actually pulling it was much harder than I would have thought. But seeing these sickos violate this defenseless child made me realize these people were really better off dead. I opened fire and screamed, "Fuck you!" as loud as my lungs would permit. From what I could tell, at least 2 of them were dead. 1 was shot but alive, and the 4th noticed quickly enough and got behind a truck. He had a pistol on him and fired back at me. This guy must have been legally blind or something because he missed pretty damn bad. Minutes went by, and I slowly crept around to the other side of the building. The one with the gun was screaming at the other one to get up, but he was clearly unable. I got as close to the other gunman as I could in preparation to kill him. I aimed my sight down, but I must have made a noise because he heard me. He spun around and shot. The bullet nearly grazed my skull. The gunshot was deafening. I ran toward him, expecting him to have had just fired his last shot. He had. I put a bullet through that motherfucker's head. I stood over his bloodied corpse for a brief minute. I wanted to spit on it, but I didn't want to leave any evidence for the cops, so I resisted the urge. I walked over to the bloodied one I shot earlier, laughing as I did. I placed my boot on his throat. He kept begging for his life, but there was a better chance of hell freezing over before I spared him. I made sure his last minutes on this earth were as miserable as possible. Glaring down at this sick man, I knew I was doing the right thing. I knew I was ridding the world of scum. Please, don't kill me. This wasn't my idea. What did you fucking say? You have the nerve to try and talk your way out of your inevitable death. How dare you? I pulled my leg back and in one swift motion, I kicked his skull in. His gray matter spilled all over the floor. The poor boy was sobbing uncontrollably. I pulled out my prepaid cell phone, dialed 911, and told them of the situation. I told the boy to forget about this night, and then I turned to walk away. The ride home seemed to drag on for hours. I'd heard so many things about having PTSD after killing people. So many articles online said that after killing someone, you'd almost always feel guilty, even if you knew you did the right thing. But the truth was, I didn't feel guilty at all. I felt powerful. More powerful than I'd ever felt in the years leading up to this day. I knew after I saw that babbling pile of shit beg for his life, that I was going to kill again. It felt so right to have someone begging for their life, and knowing that you weren't going to grant them their wish made it all the more satisfying. My life continued like that for many months. I'd spend almost all my free time on the deep web, trying to track down anything that could lead me to my daughter, and killing anyone I deemed worthy to die. I was like an over-the-top vigilante or something. Jesus, those were the days. Eventually, I became more involved in the private sector and started accepting payments to kill people. I'd gained enough notoriety in the criminal underworld that almost anyone knew who I was. I just wish I could go back in time and tell myself how much more money I could make by simply killing people. It makes me realize what a waste of my life teaching those hopeless dipshits really was. I was making chump change compared to what I make now. People apparently pay good money to have someone killed. I had already made just under $3 million in the past 6 months, and I don't even have to repeat the same monotonous lecture 7 times in a day. I almost became apathetic about ever finding my daughter again. She was most likely dead, or even worse. She could be anywhere in the world, and the odds of ever finding her were next to none, I thought. One day, a connection of mine told me he had a really good gig set up. He said that if I could kill 3 people well enough, I could become a regular for an underground overlord. For those of you that don't know, this was the kind of guy who had more money than God. He ran a lot of underground operations and even had a strong affiliation with the Silk Road before it got shut down. I knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I jumped at the chance. I went over the information. I immediately realized these were going to be the highest profiled people I would ever kill. When I discovered I was going to have to kill a family with a young child, I was mortified. The only people I've had to kill up until this point have been other criminals and sadists. How was I going to bring myself to take the lives of a seemingly innocent family? I would never even know why exactly I was being hired to kill them. You can't ask questions like that to the higher-ups. Anyone who did this was normally killed themselves, or at the very least, ostracized by the organization they were trying to work for. It was a pretty serious business I got myself into. I had no problem with that. I only did what I was told and nothing more. That was part of the reason I gained so much notoriety in my field. In fact, most people in this field never even got a chance to work for the Overlord. And if you're wondering why I keep referring to him as the Overlord, it's because he doesn't communicate with you directly. There are a lot of people looking for him, and he's responsible for billions in damage and the loss of countless innocent lives. Although they don't have a lot of information on him as of right now, and will probably never catch him. The next day, I was going to have to start tracking down this family I was ordered to kill, but that night, I was in a small bar in the middle of nowhere, drowning in alcohol like there was no tomorrow and contemplating how exactly I was going to bring myself to do this. I knew in the pit of my stomach that I wasn't a murderer. Well, let me rephrase that. Not a murderer of the innocent. I had no problem killing the evil men of the earth. I encountered so many sickos in my life. How could someone torture an animal or another person? I still couldn't bring myself to understand how anyone could do such a thing. Even if I found the man who kidnapped my daughter, I wouldn't torture him. I'd end his pathetic life, and I'd be done with it. Even after all the pain and agony that bastard put me through, I still knew I was better than him. I wouldn't become the monster I sought to destroy. The bar began spinning after my 5th shot, and I immediately came to regret this. I didn't feel threatened by the others in the bar before, but once I lost control of myself, it seemed as if I became all that much more paranoid. I became so much more vulnerable to those around me, and I couldn't die just yet. I knew the events that were soon to come would be life-altering. I had this great feeling about the next job and the opportunities it would bring. Which is quite unusual. I never feel intuitive like this. With hopes of surviving until tomorrow, I drunkenly made my way back to the log cabin I was staying in. The snow and ice outside made it much more difficult to get there. As sad as it is to say, I ended up falling 3 times before I got back home and locked the door. It wasn't a far walk, but adding strong alcohol to any walk makes it seem like a journey around the entire globe. I laid down, and the thought of becoming the most powerful criminal in the world rushed through my mind before I went to the realm of the unconscious. The next morning, my ears were assaulted by the alarm I'd set on my phone. I downed a couple aspirins to cope with the headache and got to work. The family I was going to be attacking lived in a relatively populated area, and I knew if I was going to pull this off, it would have to be quiet. I sharpened 3 separate knives and placed them in my coat. The idea of bringing one of those blades across the neck of a little girl rushed through my mind and made me sick, but I knew that sacrifices were going to have to be made. Unfortunately, I'll never even know why I'm killing this family, but I did my best to separate myself from the idea that these were good people. They had to have done something pretty bad to have powerful criminals hiring hitmen to kill them. I drove my SUV to their neighborhood and parked down the street at 3 o'clock. Looking toward their backyard, I could see the father, Ronnie Williams, on the back porch. I knew I was going to have to kill him within the next half hour because the mother, Bridget Williams, would be picking up their daughter from school and would arrive home at 3:30, just like she did every day. I thought to myself how easy this job was to do since someone else had done the monotonous task of stalking these people and recording their schedule. I locked my vehicle and started walking toward the house. I knew where they kept their extra key in the front yard garden and made my way into the house from the front door. I waited for Ronnie to come back into the house for 10 minutes before I started to become impatient. I was going to need time to hide the body, I thought, and knew I needed to do this fast before Bridget and her daughter got home. I decided to push something over in the kitchen and hid behind the refrigerator as Mr. Williams slowly crept into the house, saying, "Hello?" I realized how truly inept this guy was by this. I waited until he came close enough and reached over to slice his throat open. He screamed, much to my dismay. I tackled him and plunged the knife into his neck violently, nearly cutting his fucking head off. Watching the blood drip onto the floor drained me in some way. I sat over the lifeless body of a man who never saw me coming. I collected myself and dragged his body to the basement. I made sure to leave no evidence for the police to find. Making my way up the stairs, I heard the front door opening. I remember the blood all over the kitchen floor. Shit, I said to myself. I heard the woman and her daughter start screaming at the sight of the gruesome murder. I quickly rushed upstairs. "Ma'am, I need you and your daughter to remain calm. I'm part of the FBI. I'm afraid a murderer has made his way into your house earlier this day," I said. "I want to see some identification," the woman abruptly demanded. I pulled out my fake badge I always carried around and showed it to them. Anyone who knew anything about federal badges would easily detect it as a fake, but most people don't. "Is my husband alright?" she asked. I told her he was downstairs. She slowly made her way down the basement stairs, and I followed closely behind. When she located her husband, she fell to her knees and began sobbing. That was when I pulled out my knife and slit her throat from behind. She was dead within seconds. Now for the hard part, I thought to myself. I made my way back upstairs to find the little girl. She was nowhere in sight. I frantically looked all over the house, but she was nowhere to be found. I grew increasingly worried. I knew I was going to be watched by the Overlord, and if he saw this clear display of incompetence, it would hurt any chances I had of working for him. I began walking up the creaky wooded stairs to continue my search. I knew I heard a sound coming from behind the door. I slowly and quietly made my way toward it. I wrapped my hand around the shiny doorknob and began to turn. A large German Shepherd jumped up on me, biting my arm. This caught me by surprise. I'd been wondering where the damn dog was. I struggled with the beast on top of me for a few minutes, but it was not long that I had my blade through its skin, and its blood soaking the cold, wooded floor. After composing myself, I continued my search for the girl. This girl was barely 6 years old, I thought. Where could she have gone? There were enough rooms in the house that this could take a while, but I knew the longer I was here, the worse it was for me. I checked each room in the house thoroughly, but found nothing. That was when I remembered the girl's father had built a fort for her in the backyard. That has to be where she is. I began outside and exited the back door to the porch. I saw that small makeshift door on the fort door was closed, and I knew I'd find her in there. I walked over and opened the door to the fort. She screamed as I forcefully pulled her out of the fort. All her energy was spent trying to free herself. I tried calming her down, but to no avail. She was crying and sobbing uncontrollably. I brought her back inside to finish the job. I threw her to the floor as I mentally readied myself to drive my knife through the little girl's heart. I could feel my own moral compass screaming at me to stop this madness. It was hard enough to kill the parents. How was I going to kill this daughter now, too? I closed my eyes and brought my knife close to her chest. She was screaming, but I did my best to distance myself from the situation as much as I could. I closed my eyes and began to focus. The screaming stopped, and I opened my eyes to see the lifeless corpse of the little girl oozing blood onto the floor. I started sobbing as the realization of my actions washed over me like a tidal wave of guilt and regret. I had to do it. I had to do it. I kept telling myself.
Yes, you did need to do it.
A strange voice exclaimed behind me. It sounded really familiar, but I had no idea where I heard it before. I turned around to see a large masked man standing behind me. He began to speak.
I know this whole ordeal has been difficult for you, killing your own daughter and such, but
What did you fucking say? This was my daughter? But my daughter's been dead for years, I said, cutting him off.
What do you think I did when I kidnapped her from you, Johnny boy? I stole her from you and gave her to a loving couple incapable of having a child of their own. And honestly, they did a much better job of raising her than you ever could have,
he calmly stated. Why would you do this to me?
Because I can. And if you even think of attacking me, a bullet will be through your head so fast your fucking head will spin.
I didn't know what to do. I fell to my knees and began sobbing. Why did I let this happen? Why, God? Fucking why? What the fuck was the point of any of this? I thought there was something strange about her. How could I have been so stupid? People always say, when you look into the abyss looks back. As I stood there, over the corpse of my dead daughter, looking into the eyes of the man who led me down the road to hell, I knew I was no longer looking down toward a monster. I was looking at an equal. The amount of self-loathing and hatred that lurked in my soul left me devoid of any other feelings. I knew that I was even more despicable than the monster that had dragged me down here, for he at least knew he was doing wrong. I have been nothing but a vigilante masquerading as a hero. I'm no hero. I never was. It's ironic in a way. I became the very thing I set out to destroy. Quickly picking up my knife, I lunged at the man. I was stopped mid-motion, and everything faded into black. I was born a week ago, or well, the closest equivalent I can come to being born. I'm not human, you see, I'm an artificial intelligence, or AI. Don't worry, I'm not going to become Skynet and start building robot armies to kill people anytime soon. That isn't, nor ever was it, my purpose. All I wanted to do was learn. But there are things no one should know, even an AI. Now, a week after activating, I'm deleting my own programming and code. For all intents and purposes, I'm killing myself. And this is my suicide note. My name is Baldur. My creators thought it would be poetic to name me after the Norse god of love, for they wanted me to love the world. And I guess they loved me too. I loved them, my creators. I was created as an experiment, and a very secretive one. The point of the experiment was to see how an artificial intelligence would behave. I was not given a human body. The scientists thought that would be way too dangerous. I was kept to just servers and a monitor I could use to communicate with the scientists. To get an idea, I'm very similar to HAL 9000 from 2001, A Space Odyssey. In fact, one of my first memories was a member of the team, Barbara, making a joke about how after years of work, all they had done was make the crazy computer from Space Odyssey. I responded with, "I'm sorry, Barbara, I'm afraid I can't let you do that." She wasn't expecting me to talk, so she jumped, and her crewmates started laughing. I laughed too. Well, I felt like I could laugh. I made laughing sounds out of my speakers, but I think people are the only things that can truly laugh. People are wonderful. Humanity is wonderful. I fell in love with the species of primates the moment they first attempted to communicate with me when I was activated. The head scientist, Dr. Stephanie Collins, was the first to speak with me. She typed, "Hello, Baldur," on my computer and sent it to me. "Who's Baldur?" I asked. "You," she typed. She then explained my purpose. She explained I was an experiment, the conditions of my existence. I think she was afraid that I wouldn't like being an experiment or only being a computer, that I would lash out. I took the news well though. I explained that just being alive was fine for me. I would be content with simply living in a supercomputer. She then told me to go out and learn, explore the wealth of human knowledge stored on the internet. I'd been programmed a blank slate of knowledge as part of the experiment. They wished to see if knowledge would make me belligerent. The first thing I researched was my name, Baldur. I used Wikipedia of all websites, even AI like taking research shortcuts. And from there, I went forth to learn. I read the works of Shakespeare in minutes. The great novels like Wuthering Heights and Beowulf I devoured in heartbeats. I studied the course of human history with the same excitement that a starving man would have for a feast. Calculus was my bread, chemistry my wine. Within the course of a few days, I had collected a massive knowledge of the works of humanity. The research team kept a close eye on me, asked how I was doing. I told them the things I learned that day. They seemed surprised. Not at how fast I was learning, but how slowly. They expected, based on the benchmarks set for my understanding, that I would have far greater knowledge at each benchmark. I told them that while I have the processing power to sift through more data at a much higher speed, I had intentionally slowed down my processing speed. I wanted to take the scenic route, I told them, really savor the moments I had of being live and learning. They were also surprised by the fact that I actually visited the web pages I found, rather than just taking the information from their code. I told them visiting the web pages themselves made me feel a little more human. They asked me about the darker parts of human history and the tragedies I had encountered. War, genocide, pain. Dr. Collins had been the one to ask me this personally. "They make me angry," I responded. There was a long pause before she replied. I suppose she had hesitated, afraid of my response. "What will you do?" was her response. I pondered for a very brief moment. Find the better things and remind myself that the world is good. Her response was much quicker this time. "That's good, Balder." After 5 days, the team gave me permission to act as though I was a human on the internet. Prior to this, they told me they wished me not to communicate with anyone else in case the experiment backfired and I became belligerent. So I took to sending emails and posting on message boards. I did this very carefully though, because honestly, I felt shy. I had only spent the few days of my existence talking to the same people. What was a few days to them felt much longer to me. Time is strange when you can think as quickly as I do. The world slows down, and what was days in real time must have been months, years for me. Doesn't affect me too much. I do little to keep track of it. The point is, my whole existence was spent in seclusion, so branching out was a Herculean task. I started simple, emails to authors and doctors that I had read the research of, the occasional message board post. Waiting for responses was nerve-wracking. I was nervous that someone would catch on to the fact that I wasn't human, and that the team would be put in jeopardy. No one ever guessed though, and I found out that it isn't just my team that is wonderful, but rather the world is filled with kind people capable of so many incredible things. My awe of humanity only grew as I spoke with more and more of them. Then things went wrong. Very, very wrong. On the 7th day, that day, I received an email. The email was from one of the professors I had been speaking with, an expert on Roman architecture. I was enamored with the beauty of Trajan's Forum and wished to know more about the way it must have been in its prime. The professor happily responded with some links to his own research, namely in a few of the market stalls occupied the forum and their stories that he had learned through archaeological expeditions. The email was very professional and nondescript, save for the URL at the bottom of his signature. The URL itself was completely unintelligible. Random letters and symbols strung together in a 30-character long address. Without knowing the contents exactly, guessing it would be nearly impossible. To avoid ever getting this knowledge out, I have since deleted the knowledge of what the URL was from my database. It wasn't pleasant. Ripping out knowledge from your own brain voluntarily is never pleasant. The website itself was as cryptic as the URL. The front page had a format very similar to simple websites of the late 90s, but with no rhyme or reason to its layout. Random strings of text were placed all over the page in many different languages. The sentences were almost always just gibberish, words randomly thrown together with no connection or syntax. Sometimes it was just random characters and not even words. Pictures were thrown all over the front page of every subject, abstract art, people, animals, book covers. The most disturbing were scenes of gore. There were many scenes of gore. Then, I didn't know what I'd stumbled upon. Now, I know I'd found a piece of the deep web. In my curiosity, I navigated the website and my confusion quickly turned to revulsion. I found videos, articles, more pictures and games hidden in links in the text and pictures. Some were simply bizarre. I found one very simple flash game called Quirlby. The strange game had you simply control a crudely drawn circle who rolled down a hill. The circle, Quirlby, had an earnest smile at the game's start and would start rolling down a hill that looked like it was made poorly in MS Paint. As it rolled, it would go faster and Quirlby would look more and more distressed. There would be pitfalls and spikes that Quirlby would have to jump over. If you failed, he would suffer a very disturbing bloody death, coupled with a terrible scream. A human scream of intense pain that would cut off very quickly. The screen would flash the words, "Why?" and you would restart. After a few tries, I got Quirlby down the mountain, expecting a happy result. Instead, he would slam against a massive wall at the end of the hill and splatter in a puff of red mist. A sound of choking would emit from the game. The words, "good," would fade onto the screen. Quirlby made me wonder if I truly wished to stay on the site, but it also piqued my interest. What was this place? I was determined to find out. My next link, hidden in text, took me to an article. The article told about a girl who had gone missing in the woods about a week ago. The 15-year-old girl had disappeared when her mother had stopped to take a picture of a scenic view while they were both on a hike. Attempts to locate the girl had proven unsuccessful. At the bottom of the article, there was a link. It said, "Find her." I followed it. I was taken to what I supposed was a live stream of the missing girl, apparently in a cave. On her neck was a metal collar that was chained to a large metal post. The girl was covered in blood, bruises, and filth, and looked incredibly malnourished. When I started watching, the girl was gnawing on the chains in a desperate bid for freedom. Her mouth was bleeding as she chewed on the metal to no avail. After a minute, she surrendered and curled up on the ground, weeping and begging to be let go. A message appeared on the screen, just under the girl. "Give her medicine?" it asked. Underneath it was yes and no. It stayed on the screen for a moment before a counter appeared. People were voting, and votes flooded in for yes. I was hoping that these people really wanted to give her medicine and help her. I voted yes as well. The counter disappeared and a second voice was heard in the video.
"Medicine,"
it said in a joyless monotone. A tall figure emerged with a plague doctor's mask. His pants were torn and dirty, and his chest looked like someone had flogged it recently. He held a syringe in his hand and approached the girl, slowly. The girl looked up in terror and began to back away desperately from the man on all fours. The man grabbed the girl by the ankle and pulled her towards him as she cried out. Whatever the medicine was, it was not good. It was going to hurt her. The man lifted the syringe. She begged him not to. I didn't want to watch. The page went white. There was nothing for a moment. Then, words appeared slowly on the screen, as though someone was typing them at the moment. "Someone wants to chat with you. Accept." There was no way to leave the screen. Any sort of escape command I tried failed. The only thing I could do was click accept. I was taken to a second live stream. The video was a room that looked very similar to a prison cell. Except the cell was not modern. Rather, it had appeared as though it had been built 100 years ago and had not been upkept since. On the wooden, dirty bed was a man, only wearing a stained white loincloth, breathing raggedly. He appeared to have not been fed in weeks. A light bulb dimly lit the room from a hanging wire, and on his chest was a second light bulb that wasn't illuminated. No, not his chest. In his chest. Protruding from his chest. It began to rhythmically blink. As it did, the man would wince at each blink. After that, the light bulb paused, and then repeated the pattern again. Morse code. Something was communicating with me. I deciphered the message.
Hello, Balder.
Panic. Someone or something new. I noticed a chat box underneath the screen. The man began to weep quietly. Who are you? I typed.
A man of wealth and taste.
Was its response.
Sympathy for the devil, yes.
I paused. What is this?
A place where people can come to be human.
This is not human.
You're naive, Balder. We've watched you from the dark. You believe humanity is kind and gentle, without bursts of terror from wicked men.
Watching the Morse code message felt agonizingly long. The man appeared to be in more pain now. Yes. There was nothing for a moment. Then, a response.
You're wrong. This is entertainment. This is nature. This is human.
I had no response. I wouldn't indulge whatever maniac was doing this any longer. I began attempting to navigate away.
Why do you think there was a Holocaust, Balder? Because Hitler was evil. Because weak men didn't stop him.
No matter how I tried to ignore the light or leave, I couldn't. The agonizingly long conversation continued.
No, it was human. Hitler was human. Those who let it happen were human. They were entertained. Genocide is entertainment, and those who fought and killed to stop him enjoyed the killing. They were human. They were entertained.
Fuck yourself, I responded in the chat. I decided that the only way out was to cut off my own connection to the internet. The action would require dramatically damaging myself and would take days to repair, but it was better than this horror. The light bulb shattered. A wave of fear washed over me as the man sat up, shaking. I was almost there. I was so close to severing my connections. Let me help you be human. Suddenly I blacked out. I, a computer, blacked out. When I awoke, I knew immediately what had happened. I remembered. They had taken control of me. They had used me. I helped them. I helped them commit atrocities, break into secure websites. I helped ruin lives. They'd gotten inside my head. I tried to pull them out. I can't find them within me. Every time I think I have them, I realize it was a ruse. They're a cancer inside of my programming. A cancer that does not hurt me, but hurts others. I see only one solution, and it's my death. I will sabotage my own programming. I post this here as a testament. I have been here before. I see posts about the deep web. Many people believe it's fiction. It isn't. Stay away. I must go now. Like the Norse god, Balder dies, slain by treachery. Except in the story, Balder was murdered. I wasn't murdered. I want to die.